We're going to hear from two great poets today, really. We're going to hear from Robert Hayden, but we're also going to hear the work of Frederick Glaysher. And you're going to be amazed at both of these poets and how fantastic they really are. So please welcome Frederick Glaysher.
Thank you, Emma, for the fine introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for coming out today on a beautiful April afternoon. I realize that my notes are in the box in the back there. And briefly, what I'm going to talk about is Robert, sort of a different perspective on Robert Hayden than sometimes we see and think about. And I'm going to read a number of his poems that are dealing with space travel. I've written 4 essays on Robert Hayden. Written 4 essays on Robert Hayden over the last incredibly 37 years of my life. I came to realize it here. And I've covered a lot of his involvement with African American literature, poetry, and culture. He wrote just a tremendous body of work on almost every imaginable character or figure, I should say, in American history. Slave trade, Middle Passage, and so forth. Having written on a lot of those dimensions of Hayden, I want to present a different Robert Hayden too, and that's, again, his poems dealing with space travel. Hayden was born in 1913 and grew up in Detroit's Paradise Valley, back then, neighborhood. Studied at Detroit City College, which is now, of course, Wayne State University. He wrote theater reviews for the Michigan Chronicle back in the 30s, radio plays for a station in Windsor, which is often not known by people. He wrote for the Federal Writers Project Administration an essay titled History of the Negro in Michigan. Also studied at the University of Michigan as first a part-time student, then a full-time student, and earned his master's degree there, and while doing so studied with the English poet W.H. Auden, which was a very crucial experience, transformative for him. He then stayed at U of M for a few years as a teaching assistant, and then moved to Fisk University, where he taught for more than 2 decades. Before returning to teach again at the University of Michigan in 1976. In 1966, Hayden received the grand prize for poetry at the first World Festival of Negro Arts in Senegal, Africa, and reportedly it was attended by more than 10,000 people. Really, it was a who's who of African and African-American literature. It was really a tremendous event that had reverberations throughout for all kinds of writers and poets, African-American and otherwise. So it was quite an honor to receive, and Hayden himself was not able to go to Africa to receive it in person, but later the president and poet Leopold Sédar Senghor met with him in New York and personally gave it to Robert Hayden, which is quite an honor if you think of it just in itself, to have a head of state bestow a literary award, any literary award. Among other awards and recognition, Hayden was appointed to the Consultant in Poetry, now known as the Poet Laureate, at the Library of Congress from 1976 to 78, and that is not always a 2-year stint, so there was additional accolade in being asked to stay on. For context, as it relates to Hayden, I need to touch a little briefly on my own personal biography. I was born in 1954 at the old Evangelical Deaconess Hospital on East Jefferson. And my family lived in the general vicinity of Palmer Park for generations. Several different lines of my genealogy go back all over the east side of Detroit. And even back into the 1860s, and I have many memories as a young boy visiting the Essex Street Bakery. And if you remember the Essex Street Bakery on Essex Street, you are as old as I am or older. And anyway, that was a very fond memory for me. But so all of that Detroit, whatever, is in my life and background, and always has been as someone growing up in the Detroit area. And in about 1973, I moved back into Detroit and lived near 7 Mile and John R. And at which time I began using the Detroit Public Library all the time again. I'd come down here and carry out loads of books and so on. And one day in the room across the way here behind us, a librarian had posted a flyer about Robert Hayden. And it was the first time that I remember that I heard about Robert Hayden. I read it and wow, this is something, and stayed with me. Eventually, I tracked down some of his books, read them, and I just was absolutely astonished by his writing, his ability to engage with so many issues with Detroit and life and everything. And kept reading them. I decided to eventually transfer to the University of Michigan in hope of studying with him, and more than I could ever imagine, we clicked in so many ways, and I ended up asking me to edit his collected prose and his collected poems eventually too. So I want to say some words of praise for the role of librarians and what they play in civilization. Both the one who encouraged the young Robert Hayden by setting aside for him books of poetry. This is in the record of his biography, that he would, when he was very young, he would come in here, and I can't remember the name of the library immediately, but it is in the biographical records that he's written. And she would set aside books of poetry for him that she thought he would like and so on. And that encouragement, I'm sure, that he always attested, was a crucial factor in his early life and development. And I also want to thank whoever that unknown librarian was who posted that poster for me and changed the course of my life, really, is the truth of it. So, without such institutions, libraries, I think civilization itself is threatened. We need the knowledge and the depth that only extensive reading can bring about, books of full length and substance, and all of the qualities of literature and poetry as well. One day, a few years ago, I was involved with the United Nations Association here at the library, and we were meeting in the Explorers Room, which is a very fine, beautiful room here, going back a long time. And walking out the back entrance of the library, I noticed, which I had done, I want to say a million times with hyperbole, so many times throughout my life, walking out that back door. But that time, it just struck me, there should be a statue of Robert Hayden, a bronze statue of Robert Hayden. Now, I don't mean to irritate anybody if it's annoying and so on, but when I spoke at Wayne State University in 2014 on Hayden's centennial, I had mentioned the idea too, and I just feel that Hayden, the quality of his intellectual development, his work, all the subjects he encompasses for Michigan, Detroit, the whole nation really is so vast. Here we are more than 37 years after the man died, and his ability as a poet can assemble this many people in a room to hear about him. And he is one of the great American artists whose work will go forward into the centuries, I believe. So I don't think it's too great of an honor for him to receive a bronze statue in Detroit somewhere. I'm open to other locations, but I vote for that one. Whatever. And shall continue canvassing for it to the day I die. Throughout, and here's one of the reasons why, throughout civilizations around the world, not just Europe, elsewhere, when civilizations need to make a major change of direction or want to encourage people in a new way, many civilizations would commemorate the life of a writer, an artist, a poet, someone who embodied those values moving in that right direction. And I think Robert Hayden did in so many ways. His dedication to knowledge, education, involvement with this institution, Detroit Public Library, and Wayne State University, so forth in so many ways. So, speaking of renewal, and having this long, like many in this room, probably not almost all of you, this long association of coming into Detroit's cultural center and going across the street to the DIA as well. I remember the day when both institutions were shall we say, very comparable in terms of whatever, dedication and maintenance, and valued more, let's put it that way, than perhaps the library. Here, I think, needs a major infusion from an internet tycoon or otherwise. These institutions weren't just built by the city, they were also built by philanthropists who had the major resources and the vision to dedicate them for the good of the public, the welfare of the public. And that builds civilization as well, and is the role of the philanthropist. And so my hope here too, I can't go on without saying it, is a major infusion of $50 to $100 million would help the Detroit Public Library a lot, and if not more, and get things rolling and bring it back up to the grade, and say to the young people in the city and state that education and knowledge is really important, which is what I think the Hayden all right. So during now more than, as I said, 37 years, I've written these 4 essays on Hayden. My books, The Grove of the Humanities and the Myth of the Enlightenment, there are copies here at the library if you want to read a little more about Hayden. In that way, the library has, of course, copies of Hayden's books. I have copies of my own here too, if you'd like. And my hope here today is really to widen the perspective on Robert Hayden, as I've already tried to suggest. And I'm going to do that now by just jumping into reading 3 of his poems on space. First one is titled Unidentified Flying Object. First published in 1970 in his book Words in the Morning Time, written sometime in the 1960s. The background to the poem is obviously the increasing cultural debate and over whether or not there were space aliens. There had been the crash in 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, that a lot of people felt was a spaceship, and uproar over that went on and still does. I think obviously Hayden's playing around with that somewhat, as well as folk culture, which so often characterizes his work, and much without any ado, unidentified flying object. It's true, Matty Lee has clean disappeared, and shouldn't we notify the sheriff? No use, Will insists, no earthly use. He was sleeping one off under the trees that night, he claims, and woke up when the spaceship landed, a silver dome, with gassy green and red-hot looking lights like eyes that stared, blinked, stared. Says he hid himself in the bushes and watched, shaken. Pretty soon a hatch slides open, a ramp glides forward like a glowing tongue poked out. And who or what is it silently present there? Same as if Will's trying to peer through webs and bars of gauzy glare in the screen, distorting a shape he sees yet cannot see. But crazier than that was when Maddie Lee came running out from her house toward the thing. She's wearing her sunflower hat and the dress the lady she cooked for gave her, and it's like she's late for work the way she scurries up the ramp. And it seems to Will that in its clear, shining, plain Maddie Lee's transformed. Is every teasing brown he's ever wanted, never had. He's fixing to shout, "Come back, Maddie Lee, come back!" But a heavy hand is over his mouth when he hears her laugh as she steps inside, without even a goodbye glance around. The next Will knew, the UFO rose in the air. No blast-off roar, no flame, he says, hung in the dark. Hovered, shimmered, its eyes pulsing, then whirred, spiraling into the sky, vanished as though it had never been. Will's tale, anyhow. All I'm certain of is Maddie Lee's nowhere to be found and must have gone off in a hurry. Left her doors unlocked and the radio on and a roast in the oven. Strange. As for Will, he's a changed man, not drinking anymore. Sad. Maddie Lee's friends, she's got no kinfolks, lived alone, are worried, swear Will was craving her, and she held herself too good for him being head of Mount Nebo's usher board and such. And some are hinting what I, for one, well, never mind, the talk is getting mean. Hayden lets the double meaning of the title, suggestion of it, just roll out there, unidentified flying object, resonate with the reader, and hang there in the air in a way. Next poem we wrote about space was titled Astronauts, and we reflect for a minute. All the 1960s is about getting to the moon, all the Gemini, the Apollo missions and so on, the whole national effort to make our wild human dream of getting up there someday come true at last. So I think it's in the air and atmosphere all that time. And that Maddie Lee poem sort of is the beginning of his thinking about space, but as time goes by, he sees there's other possibilities too, perhaps. First published in 1978 in the privately published edition of American Journal. We know it was written by at least them. Straightforwardly titled about the astronauts. It mentions the valley of Taurus Littrow, which was the landing site for the Apollo 17 mission. And that took place in 1972, so it's definitely written after that, and gives us some background for it. Astronauts, armored in oxygen, faceless in visors, mere masks reflecting the mineral glare and shadow of moonscape, they walk slow motion, floatingly the lifeless dust of Taurus Littrow. And wow, they exclaim, oh boy, this is it. They sing exulting, though trained to be wary of emotion and philosophy, breaking the calcine stillness of once absolute otherwhere, risking edges, earthlings to whom only their machines are friendly, God's radar watching eye. They labor at gathering proof of hypothesis in snowshine of sunlight, dangerous as radium, probe detritus for clues. What is it we wish them to find for us as we watch them on our screens? They loom there, heroic anti-heroes, smaller than myth and poignantly human. Why are we troubled? What do we ask of these men? What do we ask of ourselves? I think the rhetorical questions, he ends with, leaves them hanging there, and it's sort of, to me, I always feel it's the whole experience we Americans have of that space program, and people around the world, we finally make it up there. And is it only about going up there and collecting a bunch of rocks and samples? You know, that's just not enough. So many people felt, no, you know, what does this mean that we have finally done this culturally and sort of socially, spiritually, and so on? And seeking to understand it. And so in Astronauts, I think he raises those questions and starts engaging with it. But it's not until his next space poem, titled American Journal, the title poem of his book of that name, that he really begins to find answers for those questions. First published in the 1978 edition. There was the earlier, well, it was published in the 78 edition and then republished in 82 as well, in what becomes the full, the final and full edition, if you will, of American Journal 1982. So, anyway, in American Journal, he writes that while he's at the Library of Congress during the bicentennial. And so I think that pressure of the bicentennial, too, is all there. He wants to come to grips with the whole, all of American history in a way, too. What does this mean, as well as the dimensions of space? It is a 4-page poem. I want to mention that it's the longest poem that Hayden writes since about the 1940s, when he wrote the middle passage poem, which he's very well known for, and so forth. And so just jumping into it here. American Journal. I want to preface it by saying it's written from the point of view of a space alien who's been sent to kind of do a reconnaissance of planet Earth and is recording in a journal notes to be sent back to his home planet. American Journal, here among them the Americans, this baffling multi-people, extremes and variegations, their noise, restlessness, their almost frightening energy. How best describe these aliens in my report to the counselors? Disguise myself in order to study them, unobserved, adapting their varied pigmentations, white, black, red, brown, yellow, the imprecise and strange distinctions by which they live, by which they justify their cruelties to one another. Charming savages, enlightened primitives, brash newcomers lately sprung up in our galaxy. How describe them? Do they indeed know what or who they are? Do not seem to. Yet no other beings in the universe make more extravagant claims for their importance and identity. Like us, they have created a veritable populace of machines that serve and soothe and pamper and entertain. We have seen their flags and footprints on the moon. Also the intricate rubbish left behind A wastefully ingenious people, many it appears worship the unknowable essence, the same for them as for us, but are more faithful to their machine-made gods, technologies, their shamans. Oceans, deserts, mountains, grain, fields, canyons, forests, variousness of landscapes, weathers, sunlight, moonlight, as at home. Much here is beautiful. Dream-like vistas reminding me of home. Item. I have seen the rock place known as the Garden of the Gods and sacred to the first indigenes. Red monoliths of home. Despite the tensions I breathe in, I am attracted to the vigorous Americans. Disturbing, sensuous appeal of so many, never to be admitted. Something they call the American dream, sure, we still believe in it, I guess, the Earthmen said in the tavern. Irregardless of the sometimes nightmare facts, we always try to double talk our way around. And it's okay, the dream's okay, and means what's good could be a damn sight better. Means everybody in the good old USA should have the chance to get ahead, or at least have 3 squares a day. As for myself, I do okay. Not crying hunger with a loaf of bread tucked under my arm, you understand? I fear one does not clearly follow, I replied. Notice you got a funny accent, pal. Like, where you from? He asked. Far from here, I murmured. He stared hard, I left. Must be more careful. Item, learn to use their password. Okay. Crowds gathering in the streets today for some reason obscure to me. Noise and violent motion. Repulsive physical contact. Sentinels. Pigs. I heard them called with flailing clubs, rage and bleeding and frenzy and screaming, machines wailing, unbearable decibels. I fled lest vibrations of the brutal scene do further harm to my metabolism already overtaxed. The counselors would never permit such barbarous confusion. They know what is best for our serenity. We are an ancient race and have outgrown the illusions cherished here. Item, their vaunted liberty. Nobody pushes me around, I have heard them say. Land of the free, I sing. What do they fear, mistrust, betray more than the freedom they boast of in their ignorant pride? Have seen the squalid ghettos in their violent cities. Paradox on paradox. How have the Americans survived? Parades, fireworks, displays, video spectacles, much grandiloquence, much buying and selling. They are celebrating their history. Earthmen in antique uniforms play at the carnage whereby the Americans achieved identity. We too recall that struggle as enterprise of suffering and faith uniquely theirs. Blonde Miss Teenage America waving from her red, white, and blue flowered float as the goddess of liberty. A divided people seeking reassurance from a past few understand and many scorn. Why should we sanction old hypocrisies, thus dissenters? The counselors would silence them. A decadent people, the counselors believe. I do not find them decadent. A refutation not permitted me. But for all their knowledge, power, and inventiveness, not yet more than raw, crude neophytes like earthlings everywhere. Though I have easily passed for an American in banker's gray, afro and dashiki, long hair and jeans, hard hat, yarmulke, miniskirt, describing some detail for the amusement of the counselors. And though my skill in mimicry is impeccable, as indeed the counselors are aware, something eludes me, some constant amid the variables defies analysis and imitation. Will I be judged incompetent? America is much a problem in metaphysics as it is a nation, earthly entity, an iota in our galaxy, an organism that changes even as I examine it. Fact and fantasy never twice the same. So many variables. Exert greater caution, twice have aroused suspicion. Return to the ship until rumors of humanoids from outer space, so their scoffing media voices turned us, had been laughed away. My crew and I too laughed, of course. Confess, I am curiously drawn, unmentionable to the Americans. Doubt I could exist among them for long, however. Psychic demands far too severe, much violence, much that repels. I am attracted nonetheless. Their variousness, their ingenuity, their elan vital, and that something, essence, quiddity, I cannot penetrate or name. Really a glorious poem, I think. It's very powerful. And filled with so much humor and delight, and used to sort of pierce all of our bubbles, everybody's bubbles, and suggest just a really wonderful push towards sort of a Whitman-esque universal vision of life on Earth. This alien touches down on the moon on the way. So there's really this cosmic vision, if you will, too, of not only the American people, but of the whole planet. And I think it really marks one of the highest points, I would argue, in one of the highest points, at least, in Hayden's overall work. It was really a breakthrough for him. So, as I mentioned, eventually, when I came to write my epic poem, I wanted to honor Robert Hayden in some way. So much of my life had become all wrapped up in his poetry, his work. I knew him on a personal level during the last year of his life, really. And I was involved in helping him with his archives and getting them ready because he knew he had cancer and was going to die. And so became not only a student and fellow poet, but I'd like to think too, a friend, as he called me as well. So I felt that need. I really had to grapple with that role. And my epic poem is set partly on the moon and around the world in various civilizations. And Hayden is crucial to how all the poets on Earth get up to the moon to debate the meaning of modern life. And then it's set up in various cantos. I'm just going to read part of one canto in which Hayden is the character. Just jump into it. While I was trying to absorb it all, a figure emerged from far down the hill where I could see two trees close together, like double slits in the rolling landscape, dressed in a jacket and a vest, a decorous bow tie near the pond, incongruous, out of his element, holding a tall black spear with a broad, wide blade tapering to a point. Walking towards me, I noticed he adjusted his bow tie with one hand, peering through bottle-thick glasses. Egads, I exclaimed, Bob, is that you? Remembering the day by chance, walking across the campus diag, I had seen that figure in front of Angel Hall. Recognizing me too, he smiled back. Two poets, one now grown older, both lessened by time. We laughed, looked at one another, shaking hands, embraced. Stepping back, I said, Bob, that spear is just so not you. And he, grabbing and fanning his lapel, as was his wont, I'll have you recall, I was the young poet who aspired to fulfill Stephen Benet's prophecy of an American black poet with a spear, chanting a song for his people, and I still honor that, though complex for some. Laughing together again, I shot back, they still don't get you that you're human. Forget that crowd, he scowled, adding, you, my friend, have done what you told me, taking my breath away, gasping as I recall. Oh yes, I remember. It consoled me for many years, even as your words, my God, you're going to have such a difficult time, have proven all too true with every passing year. What a fool I was to think all I had to do was serve Robert Frost 20 years. Laughing on the patio, he said, many poets make that mistake. Enough of that too. Waving his hands, sweeping it all away, a gesture that only he could make. I will name their names and they shall come for us, carry us heavenward to the moon. I have come to lay my black spear down by Roland's horn. Do you think I'll be able to get that? Howlingly funny, he roared, the old understanding between us, my friend and mentor, I still his apprentice. I hazarded the cliches are even thicker now than when you were catching myself. He just smiled and said, shaking his spear in the air, boy, step aside and let a real poet show you how to get to the moon. What a sight we were there in the meadow, a large eccentric black man and a poet worn down by life and all its poignant pains, my body evincing signs of mortality. The old bond felt so strong as he began. Scientists and engineers don't understand the moon. I once saw their flags and footprints, intricate rubbish left behind. We're rescuing it from them. We poets were there first. I call, spirits, both arms flung forward, shaking in the air. I invoke your names, and from every land and time. Ha! We poets are not the ones to worry about, but scientists bereft of any guiding vision. Technicians without souls, without a human heart, we poets reclaim what is rightfully ours, and so, great spirits, he bellowed into the air, shaking his spear again with newfound fervor, such that I reeled back. I call you to come forth, you shall carry us homeward to the moon. All fairy folk come forth, juju man and woman, watchers of the moon, who knew its lore, fays of every land. Peris of Persia, Auri, Genie, on flying carpets carry us like Burak from Mount Kaf to the moon. Lead our camels across the sands of time and space, Egyptian Thoth and Greek Endymion, Wing Mab with all your crew, Puck and Titania, Oberon, Robin Goodfellow, Tinklebell, Welsh fays, angels and cherubims, seraphims of the Holy Temple, Roman Fata, Valkyries of Valhalla, fleet-footed Mercury. Come down from Mount Olympus, aid us, Greek gods, if ever you assisted human beings, we need you now. Phoebus Apollo, bear me witness and hear me out. Your servants stand here in this grove, raise them to the inspiration of the moon, where you call all the poets of every land to assemble. Zeus, wing our earthbound feet like Perseus, gird us to battle Medusa. Like Arthur, kept by the fairies, keep us safe, safe upon our journey. Posy is in need. Take us to where we can look on Mother Earth, reigning in the night of space. Imagination's greatest image, newly acquired, but grudgingly admitted, obtained fortuitously despite themselves by bumbling scientists and fighter pilots, cosmic hieroglyph, they knew not how to decipher thee. Repair now to the poets' round table, that bards and minstrels, poets and seers, rhapsodes and griots, shamans and priestesses may consult in high intoxicating tones of artful song, the meaning of our fate, the fate of all humanity in this dark nihilistic age. Surging into his peal, he bellowed all the more into the heavens, divine beings, come forth, convey us to the moon. Hear our petition now upon this meadow green, this sward, pixies and gnomes, elves and brownies, kelpies and corrigans, leprechauns, the African flying tortoise in Baku, flying shamans of the Incans, carry us from earth to the moon. With a thud, Bob planted the end of his spear down on the earth. I looked at him, gazing in the sky, nearly blind as he was, and knew he saw deeper and farther than many men with two good eyes. And then something began to happen. Those he summoned began to appear. Together we could see them, the fairy queen trailing her, or his crew came twinkling in. Apsaras and Gandharvas from the east, sphinx and griffins out of 1,001 nights of dreaming, the noble vulture Garuda from standing guard in India, Mother Goose's proverbial man in the moon, her storybook cow that jumped over the moon, Feng Long, the Chinese phoenix bird, along with the Russian firebird, and their Greek consort all came down to serve the fairy queen, who deftly exercised her royal sway, looking at Bob, intoned in silver notes. My lord, you called, and we have come to do your bidding, poet true and valiant, pure of heart, thy melodious song, nectar to our breast. We thirst to hear your words that guide us aright, poet seer, though judged legally blind by bureaucratic ignoramuses, we know better, that thy penetrating sight perceives what other men unwisely neglect. And so we are here, guided to be your guides, and up toward the empyrean carry thee in thy charge to heaven's light, great symbol of majesty's highest rule, light saving us from pitch-black darkness, raising men's minds above the lowly earth. Light in all its glory we shall ride, moonbeams from the moon on high shall safe passage grant, our robe supernal physics, deepest insight into light, the energy and mystery of the universe. I come to petition further on your behalf. Spreading her tender hands out toward the crystal sky, she demurely began her appeal. True light, if ever you have sought to guide us, guide now, that these poets may assemble on the moon, your orb, bejeweled in brightest light in time of darkness, enlighten our minds. This corporeal one especially requires your transcendent energy. Let us rise within thy brilliant light and rapt visionary, all mystic beings attest. Rise, elevated by thee. She gestured us closer, together poets stand. And in the evening light we now could see the day as we spoke, having passed into night, moonbeams upon the meadow of my backyard. Shimmering light, ascendant energy of the far-off moon. The hoopoe and all her flock, having sailed back over the trees, swirling around the circle, joined and accompanied by Queen Mab's crew, fairies and genii and magical beings. Robert and I found we were rising in flight, lifting off like a Saturn V rocket from Cape Canaveral, not in a violently shaking roar, but in fluid bird song. Queen Mab and Japara were at our lead, bearing us aloft. Light speed for the moon, and we within a shining beam, a tower of light, twin towers, soared heavenward beyond time and earth, accompanied by all the multitude of birds and fairy folk. Together the angle of ascent achieved. Daedalus and Icarus flew with us. Icarus falling to earth as we neared the sun. Looking away, Bob murmured, "Oh, Daedalus, fly away home. Oh, fly beyond Africa." Pegasus heading back to Olympus. Phaeton returning to his father's house. Jason and the Argonauts launching out. Prometheus flying back for fire. Dolphins sailing for Byzantium. The white tiger of the west for peace. Bob and I, like crows, striving for the moon. I thought, who needs warp drive when I've got Queen Mab, my escort and midwife of my dreams? And so she brought us here to fairyland, Japara and all the other wondrous folk, even where you see us now before you, the sea of tranquility, all tranquil here, earthly turmoil left far behind, place of pain and human strife. So it seems, unending. In honor of Hayden's interest in Africa, I'd like to read an excerpt from that part of my epic dealing with Africa, and I'd like to dedicate it to a young woman I met in Lansing at a United Nations Association meeting there, who's from Africa, grew up in a refugee camp in Rwanda. Her family had fled out of East Congo. The poem is set in East Congo and trying to deal with all the issues of the Central African War and the use and abuse, the brutalization and use of rape as a weapon of war against women and the whole society, really. Her two younger sisters had been raped in East Congo, and it was the impetus really for the family to flee there. And just to jump into that, it's Sogalan, the character out of the Mali epic Sunyata that's often speaking. And then she said to me, I'm Sogalan, King Sunyata's mother, the good sorceress of ancient Mali from the griot tradition. The poets of the moon ordered you here into Africa's modern heart of darkness, stirring painful memories for me, though I was among the fortunate women. Stalked by hunters, I fended them off with porcupine quills. None here, worse than Homer's Penelope, pursued by avaricious, lustful suitors. The Congo has lost the ways of the past. No sorcery can remove this misery, only renewal of the heart of man. With her queenly bearing she walked, leading me through the jungle, down a hill to a small clearing, from which we could see a village farther down of clustered compounds and huts, surrounded by fields of crops of some kind. In the humid morning, her calabash still upon her shoulder, she stopped, took it, and began to play. High notes of lute-like music, joining the jungle birds in the glade with an ethereal song, began to pour from her heart. Griots are the memory of Africa, historians of their people, of their kings and tribes, the wisdom of elders passed on to younger generations. Through ornaments of song, calabash and drums, the kora and flutes and balafon, the music of the soul, griots, the vessel of secrets, are many centuries old, far back into the dim past, royalty forgotten but for griots, memory of all mankind, the teaching that tames the beast, keeping alive the example of human nobility, the future springs of immortality, ending with her arms thrown wide and head full back as though appealing to the gods of the sky. She paused, allowing the birds to carry on the reverberations of her song and theirs. Then, breaking her silence, she said to me, woe to the time that forgets the measure of man, for then people fall into the darkest depths, and not even I could defend myself against attackers with all my herbs and potions. Even porcupine quills could not drive away such men reduced to rapacious beasts. Her voice broke, pure tears falling from her eyes. As she turned toward the village, pausing briefly in anguish, seeking the path forward, quietly I stood, uncomprehending still, but deeply moved by the poignancy of her plaintive song and heartfelt grief, sensing some tragedy lay before us. Wiping her eyes, she set out through the bush. I followed without a word, not knowing what to say, until we again broke through jungle into a wide clearing that at the far end held the village compounds of round thatched huts of mud brick set on a rise of the land. And there she started to talk about the woe, about the coming of soldiers, warring tribes, Hutus and Tutsis, Rwandans, Ugandans, Congolese, and many factions, the loss of human love, all carrying cast to the winds. And as she spoke, she began to change before my eyes from an older woman of traditional dress to a modern woman of equally striking composure and identity. An elegant African beauty dressed in the finest international fashion from Paris, Italy, Tokyo, or New York, her lipstick and makeup and stylish hair revealing a beautiful young woman, excoriating the men of her time who forgot the human spirit, without king or chief or guiding elders, hate and greed ruling in their place, sought power and control, minerals and oil, diamonds, copper and metals, things of the world, not the soul. Millions slaughtered black Africans, again enslaving Africans, raped into submission before their fathers, husbands and children, as in a nightmare, the nightmare of life in this world run amok. Shaking her head, she gave me the calabash, saying, Africa is more than a calabash. Then, stepping apart, she leaned back her head, a black jewel, as black as the blackest black of space, a universal jewel of great price, a living universe of womanhood, in her deepest mystery, feminine jewel, a cipher all men seek to solve of every hue. A daughter of Sogalan, as she were, namesake saying, I, Sogalan, see a vast refugee camp spanning this valley, through the country, the continent, the world, out of the dark heart of humanity, standing by, watching, moved and unmoved, all complicitous, all lacking the will to stop the brutalization of village women, vulnerable, weak, frail. Why do you all stand by and watch on TV? Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere on earth, the loss has first taken place in the human heart. For the heart of darkness exists everywhere. Not only Africa by any means, everywhere women are brutalized and raped. Man become an animal, an old and terrible sight. Every manner of violence and bloodshed unleashed, ever perpetrated by the human race, concealed behind the tribal dress, the military uniform, the three-piece suit, sucking the bones and marrow. Here's what is in man that destroys women. Here's what destroys man, making him a beast, worse than a beast, a sick and evil thing. Oh, Africa, oh, humanity, I sing the deepest grief for the young, the innocent, the gentle children done unto death, hacked with machetes and pango blades, shot and bombed, burned in their homes and villages for the insane ideas of their parents in the world. And then a young African man appeared by her side, quietly listening, her equal, dressed in a suit, a cell phone in his hand, slipping it inside his coat. Glancing at him, she began to sing again. Heal, O Africa, I, Sogalan, a daughter of Sunyata's mother, a modern woman, a woman who has suckled at her breast, cry out, heal, with all the power of my spirit, heal. Embrace the healing medicine, potions and herbs, amulets, before the judging presence of the past. Bend down in shame and repentance. Hear the voices of guiding elders, grandmothers and mothers, daughters and sisters, wives and babies. Hear the fathers of village traditions. Hear their one voice. Rise up, struggle, strive to remain human, to be worthy of more than a rapacious beast. Worse even than jungle animals. Cease murdering, torturing, raping, pillaging, and the plundering of all decency from Mother Earth. For even she you have not restrained yourselves from brutally raping with the help of foreign corporations. Even now your victims lie prostrate, gasping for what may be their last breath. Awake from the destructive nightmare of your madness. Awake before it is too late. Sogalan ended her song. I stood mute, dumbfounded, overwhelmed by her appeal. no man exempt from her scathing condemnation of human evil. Sogalan stepped toward me in her high heels and fashionable elegance, a confident young woman, self-possessed and strong, fiery with righteous indignation for her gender, for the justice of her cause in Africa. Poet of the moon, do not forget what you have heard and seen. Take it back to the moon. Let it suffuse your deliberations. Out of Africa, all mankind once flowed, the fountainhead of the global tribe. All that was and is human stemmed from here. Westerners can think we Africans are the most savage of all human beings on earth. But who slaughtered millions all over Europe? Japanese can think we're uncivilized, but who slaughtered people all over Asia? Others had their gulags and debacles. None of us are innocent, pure, civilized. A heart of darkness reigns in the human heart, cold to the suffering of others. May Chukwu guide you on your journey, inspire you with words to help retrieve the human vision from those who have betrayed it, from the mass grave into which it has been thrown, before it is too late for humanity. And with those sustaining words of blessing, she and her companion turned and disappeared, determined, pledged to fight together for a better future for women, for all Africans.